I don't like lazy analysis. Disappointment and failure are not the same thing. So, here we are at the end of another long campaign. Arsenal will play Europa League football next season after finishing 5th in, to put it mildly, a disappointing end to the season. Our young team folded under the pressure, as injuries to key players held us in a chokehold, coughing, spluttering and stumbling over the finish line with all the grace of a reversing dump truck without any tyres on.
Dear Lord, what a sad little life.
Tottenham.
We've read this book before. Narratives dominate football. No matter how lazy or cliched, the good ones seem to stick. Zero to hero, rags to riches, the comeback. Maybe it's more accurate to say that narratives are football. In psychology, there's a phenomenon known as sublimation, where perceived unacceptable or negative thoughts and feelings are channeled into something that society deems more acceptable, like football. Frustration, joy, and heartbreak get thrust upon and understood through that competitive prism, and those narratives we love to believe in. There is always space for that emotional investment, care, even love. But at times, these attachments can cloud our judgment and analysis, myself included. So to really understand this particular story, we have to go back. We have to understand the context and not try and flip forward to the emotional ending. To understand the denouement, you must first read the prologue. Chapter 1. Goals Matter. It's the summer of 2020. Arsenal are basking in the glow of an FA Cup win, and it's all thanks to heroics from Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. His starring role a perfect end to a season that featured 29 goals in 44 appearances. But there was a problem. He was the club captain, the talisman, but his contract was expiring at the end of the next season. Though there were a few question marks over the nature of the contract, very few Arsenal people could see an immediate future without him there. At 31 years of age, Arsenal handed him a 3-year extension at a hefty price. Aubameyang's output halved the following season, scoring 15 goals in 39 appearances as Arsenal slumped to 8th for the second consecutive season. As Arsenal headed into the summer window of 2021, the centre-forward position was of concern. They had 3 senior strikers in Eddie Nketiah, Alexandre Lacazette and Aubameyang, as well as promising youngster Folarin Balogun. But none of those guys were the guy. However, with 4 players vying for that position, including 2 whose contracts would soon be up, it was widely accepted that the centre-forward position would be addressed in the summer of 2022. Other positions required more urgent financial surgery. But the situation soured further. Aubameyang had just 9 goals by January, 3 of which were against a West Brom under-9s reserve team, and his behaviour continued to be less than appropriate for an Arsenal captain. Tardiness, missed team meetings and absent COVID tests, as well as a late return from a specially sanctioned visit, saw him stripped of the captaincy in December 2021. He began to train on his own before leaving for Barcelona. Arsenal tried to get a striker. They recognised there may be an opportunity for top 4, and their January pursuit of Fiorentina's Dusan Vlahovic was widely publicised. But he chose Juventus, and other than Vlahovic, Arsenal's January options were limited. Alexander Isak's £76 million release clause didn't represent value for a player who has scored 2 league goals since January, and other options like Dominic Calvert-Lewin were never going to be sold mid-season as Everton headed for a relegation scrap. From a financial perspective, January is never a good time to sign players. Clubs don't want to lose their assets without significant recompense and quality replacements, and players will demand higher wages and signing on fees for those desperate teams. Arsenal were quoted $62 million for Espanyol's 27-year-old striker Raul de Tomas. I'd never even heard of him. For a club who've consistently given out bad contracts, long-term health is always the priority. Edu and Arteta would start their new striking chapter in the summer, and top 4 was always going to be hard without a top striker, especially against the likes of Harry Kane and Heung-min Son. Begrudgingly, Arsenal soldiered on, and we are where we are. Goals matter, and the data tells us that we are bang average at converting the chances that we do get. Lacazette has no open play goals since Boxing Day against Norwich. Considering the context, you can see the trail that leads us here, even if it's frustrating. Could Arteta have been less ruthless with Aubameyang? Could we have pushed harder for Vlahovic and offered him more money, even if his heart was set on Juventus? It's possible, but when you're trying to change the culture and financial model at the club, there's not much room for desperation and panic. Chapter 2. The Squad. The story doesn't end there. Chasing top 4 with a misfiring Lacazette and a steady but mid-table Eddie wasn't the only issue. Arsenal also decided to allow Pablo Mari, Callum Chambers, Sead Kolasinac and Ainsley Maitland-Niles to leave in the January window. Arsenal wanted to create a tight group to see them through to the end of the season, focusing on the players that they wanted to build around. This is where I think the club could, and probably should, take more flack. These are not the players Arsenal are relying on in the long term, but keeping them around could have helped us. Keeping the squad fresh when the likes of Bukayo Saka and Benjamin White looked dead on their feet against Newcastle could have been crucial. There can't be an Arsenal fan on the planet who would have taken Cedric up against Son over Chambers or Maitland-Niles. I am a fan of Arsenal partly because of their classy values. These players weren't playing, and I like us doing right by them, but that just isn't what a top club would do. And it's a shame that Arteta didn't think it possible or didn't want to manage those situations. Sure, we got their wages off the books, but Jurgen Klopp often talks up the players who don't play for him and hails their attitude and ability. They're clearly valued and included, and it pays dividends for Liverpool. Something to develop for Arteta's next chapter. Chapter 3. Injuries. Possibly the most important factor in all this is the injuries to key players, and more specifically, the knock-on effect it had. Thomas Partey pulling up against Crystal Palace may be the defining moment of our season. He is that important. His ability to progress the ball, get past players and move us through the thirds, retrieve the ball and provide a solid anchor for receiving and distributing means players like Ødegaard and Xhaka feel the freedom to shift that bit further forward and play their football, knowing they have that stability behind them. Thomas Partey is also one of the only players in our team to have played Champions League football. He knows the level, he knows what it takes, and at just 28, he's one of the oldest members of our squad. In Kieran Tierney's case, the knock-on effect is possibly even more important. Nuno Tavares' defensive deficiencies do a couple of things to us. Firstly, they focus attacks on one side of the pitch and drag defenders over, creating space elsewhere on the pitch. Watch the league game against Liverpool at Anfield this season. You'll see how virtually every attack goes down Nuno's side. Not only does that create tired legs and space elsewhere, it's an obvious weak point that can't sustain for 90 minutes, no matter how many players you pack in that zone. Secondly, it requires a personnel shift. With Tavares' best qualities coming in the final third, you can't allow your other fullback to push on too much. They may be able to invert into the midfield as an auxiliary central midfielder at some points, or roll around to a 3 in the build-up, and when that's Takehiro Tomiyasu or Benjamin White, no problem. They can do that. And we saw earlier in the season that Tomiyasu on one side and Nuno on the other gave us a different dynamic. When those players aren't available, you're either asking Nuno to do something he's uncomfortable with, sitting further back, or allowing him to bomb on and asking Cedric to do something he's uncomfortable with, soaking up pressure, dealing with aerial threats, things he's less suited to. Neither situations are ideal. In the end, certain players provide stability. Turning around in the dressing room and seeing the players you're going out to battle with are experienced international footballers breeds confidence. When they're out of the team, cracks begin to show. So where do we go from here? What's the next chapter? Arsenal never really expected to be in the race in the first place. Clubs do all sorts of financial and situational modelling, with entire teams dedicated to analysing every data point they can get their hands on to decide best practice. To think that Arsenal never considered what might happen in this situation is frankly laughable. They would have planned for as many outcomes as possible, but their expectations of this season might have, for example, informed how much they pushed for Vlahovic in January. They will have had all sorts of plans and scenarios mapped out, including differing lists of player targets dependent on league position. That's why, if reports are to be believed, the Kroenkes are ready to invest this summer regardless of our finishing place. They know this plan is long term. You can lose a 50-50, misplace a pass, or concede a goal. You can have key injuries and lose games. It's the patterns that should be the focus. Measurable data, and what your eyes tell you too. We're spending more time in the opposition's final third year on year, as this graph shows, measuring field tilt, which is regarding where the team spends their time on the pitch, even performing at a title-winning level at some points this season. We're taking more shots, as this graph shows, increasing year on year from 2 seasons ago, this time performing above title-winning form at times. And finally, our non-penalty XG differential, where we subtract expected goals against from expected goals for, looks better than it's been for a long time. There are, however, data points where we stagnated and some where we look worse too, but the trends generally look good. I don't like lazy analysis, where every problem is magically solved by the market. Occasionally that's true, but most of the answers you're looking for are there, on the pitch, in the tactics, the trends, and the intricacies. For this particular tale, however, I think it all leads back to squad building. We know the deficiencies we have, and this one, in my view, is fixed in the market. Soon I'll make a video on the positions we need to address and how I believe we should go about that. A point made by my podcast co-host Bradley springs to mind. We can't have our cake and eat it too. We put out the first 20 youngest first 11s in the league in terms of average age. To then chastise them for not having the experience to see this through seems bizarre to me, especially with the age and experience level of the manager. I said myself at the beginning of this season that 6th represented progress and that we were meeting expectation. The players are going through their growing pains, gaining the much fabled and, in my opinion, slightly over-indexed experience. The particular sword we live by inevitably had another edge. Here's the thing, disappointment and failure are not the same thing. I am disappointed that Arsenal didn't get top 4. I would have loved to see the smiles wiped off those Spurs faces. But did we fail this season? Not for me. Let's not cloud our judgment with unfair narratives. It hurts, of course, to lose out to them, but it's just another chapter in our story. And as we turn the page and meet some new characters, the pain of this chapter might just dissipate.